Have you noticed how weird the weather's been lately? Not just this year, but the last few years. This year, so far, it's been mainly tornadoes in the dead of winter from southeastern Michigan, northern Illinois, Ohio, and New York. We got Wisconsin's first tornado in February since it became a state, along with Michigan's second February tornado on record. I've been told by several folks it's HAARP. So, like a curious citizen, I figured I'd look into it. Oh my God, did I dive down the rabbit hole hard. I found out that not only can it control the weather, it can do a whole lot more. HAARP is an acronym for High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, located outside of Gakona, Alaska. It started out meaning Harmonic Active Auroral Research Program, but was changed early in the planning and development stage. I'm not sure who or why they changed it. HAARP was initiated and funded by the United States Air Force, the United States Navy, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, the DoD's Weapons Research Program, and the University of Alaska. HAARP received nearly $300 million for funding. These organizations collaborated to establish and operate the HAARP facility. It was designed by Bernard Eastland. He has a doctorate in physics, an inventor, and is known for his work in the field of plasma physics and electromagnetics. HAARP's basically a very powerful, high-frequency transmitter to study the uppermost part of the Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere. Its main tool is the Ionospheric Research Instrument. It's a group of 180, it's soon to be 360, high-frequency, 72 feet tall crossed antennas spread across 33 acres. Since the antennas form a sophisticated phased array, the transmitted beam can take up many shapes, can be scanned over a wide angular range, and multiple beams can be formed. The antennas are linked together to function as one giant steerable antenna. It's steerable because it can aim millions of watts of extremely low frequency waves into one tiny patch of the upper atmosphere. The amount of energy we're talking about here is up to 3.6 gigawatts. For folks like me who don't know what the fuck a gigawatt is, that's 3,600,000,000 watts. Just to give you an idea of how much power we're talking about, the largest AM radio station in North America pushes out 50,000 watts. HAARP's power is equal to 72,000 of those radio stations, injecting their entire output into a spot that's about 12 miles across by 2.5 miles deep by 90 to 180 miles up. There are free electrons and ions in the ionosphere that radio waves can interact with. HAARP's radio waves heat the electrons and create small disruptions that are similar to the kinds of atmospheric disturbances that happen in nature. Natural phenomena are random and difficult to observe. With HAARP, scientists can control when and where the fluctuations occur so they can measure their effects. In addition, they can repeat these experiments to confirm the measurements really show what researchers think they do. So, to say it's got some juice would be wildly understated. Does it have the power to manipulate the weather? Oh, fuck yeah. And that's not all. Weather modification/manipulation has been a threat for decades. So much so that the Environmental Modification Convention was introduced to the UN in 1977. It basically proposed that member nations wouldn't use weather weapons against each other. They took it seriously enough that the majority of developed nations ratified it and 48 others signed it. That was 1977. As of 2022, the convention now has 78 state parties. The convention bans weather warfare, which is the use of weather modification techniques for the purposes of inducing damage or destruction. The Convention on Biological Diversity of 2010 would also ban some forms of weather modification or geoengineering. Northrop Grumman openly advertises that they do weather modification. In a speech given in 1962 by, at the time, Vice President Lyndon Johnson at a graduation ceremony when he was talking about weather satellites, he stated, "He who controls the weather will control the world." President Kennedy admitted that Operation Popeye involved cloud seeding to extend the monsoon season over specific areas of the Ho Chi Minh Trail to disrupt enemy supply lines during the Vietnam War. In Georgia, in the 1960s and 70s, cloud seeding activities were particularly notable due to their association with a lawsuit against the government. The lawsuit stemmed from concerns raised by farmers who believed that cloud seeding operations were negatively impacting their crops and water supply by flooding them out. Control of space means control of the world. From space, the masters of infinity would have the power to control Earth's weather, to cause drought and flood, to change the tides and raise the levels of the sea, to divert the Gulf Stream and change the climates. Lyndon Johnson, 1957. Dick Cheney said on camera in 2005 we would fully be able to control the weather by 2016. He insinuated lightning was the only real hurdle left. Several related Freedom of Information Act documents and patents are hard to explain if you want to brush this off completely. So, not only is weather modification possible, it's already been done successfully, multiple times. Hell, the process has been patented. Patent US 4686605A modifies the properties of the ionosphere for various applications, including communication, weather modification, and defense purposes. Dr. Nick Begich is an American author, lecturer, and researcher who has been involved in various fields, including science, politics, and the effects of emerging technologies on society. He's best known for his work on the HAARP project. Begich has written several books and papers focusing on HAARP and its potential implications. The book, Angels Don't Play This HAARP, that he co-authored with Gene Manning, is one of his more popular books. He has also spoken at conferences and appeared in several interviews discussing these topics at length. Begich has presented on the subject as an expert witness for the European Parliament, Committee on Foreign Affairs, Security and Defense Policy Subcommittee on Security and Disarmament, Globe, and others. Dr. Begich clearly describes HAARP like this. HAARP has an array of antennae that can be focused and concentrated. You got to think about this in a much different way than how radio frequency energy normally behaves. If you think about a radio broadcast antenna broadcasting a radio frequency, that energy dissipates and spreads out very rapidly from the point of broadcast, the antenna, out into the atmosphere. The further away you get, the less dense and the less concentrated is the radio frequency energy. That's why radio stations fade out over distance. On the other hand, what HAARP does is by firing this array or field of antennas, if you can imagine firing them in such a way as to create kind of a corkscrewing motion, a cyclotron resonance is what it's called, where that energy is then focused to a smaller and smaller area. When it hits the ionosphere, it becomes concentrated. Think about that in the same way as light coming off of a laser versus light coming off of a flashlight. When you think about HAARP, think about it as a mechanism on the ground that's designed to interact directly and plug into those magnetic field lines, and then actually use the environment itself as part of the machine on the ground. And think about it in this sense. Think about that machine on the ground, this field of antennas broadcasting radio frequency as a primer, a small amount of energy, because the big energy is contained in the natural environment, the ionosphere. The idea is, if we understand enough about how these mechanisms work, then we can trigger various cascade effects, where it sort of builds on the energy that's naturally in place. And so, imagine that ionosphere as a bubble around the Earth, several hundred miles thick, starting about 30 miles off the Earth's surface. Now, that's a highly charged area, a tremendous amount of energy potential there. In fact, some will remember a number of years ago, there was a shuttle experiment where they drug a tether, a dangling wire, through the ionosphere to see what would happen. An energy was picked up as it moved, because when you move something, a conductor, through an electric field that's as charged as the ionosphere, it actually begins to move current, which it did. It shunted that current straight into the shuttle and almost blew it out of the sky. The other thoughts with HAARP systems is the actual heating of the ionosphere. When it's heated, because this energy is concentrated, what happens is that the ionosphere then lifts up and moves out several hundred kilometers. Now imagine if you're a satellite drifting through space where there's no atmosphere, and all of a sudden you hit a column of atmosphere that's not supposed to be there. What will happen is it creates friction, and that friction causes that satellite to burn up. And all of a sudden you have a satellite down. When you turn the instrument off, everything goes back to normal, and you have plausible deniability on a satellite going down because nobody knows this kind of technology generally exists. Now, another place you can use it in the same application, imagine that column going out several hundred miles into space from its normal atmospheric level way down here. Now you've got an incoming comet or asteroid coming in from outer space at tremendous velocity. Normally, those objects, when they hit our atmosphere, they again encounter tremendous friction. They burn up, and most objects just dissipate before they ever hit the surface. But with big objects, the kind of objects most people are worried about, if you could go from, say, 30 miles of atmosphere to 200 miles of atmosphere, almost 7 times that amount of distance, and project a trajectory downward, what you're able to do in that instance is allow those larger objects to burn up way before they hit the Earth. In fact, the Strategic Studies Institute in London, in reviewing Soviet research on this very same technology, was suggesting that it could be used for not an anti-satellite technology so much as an anti-asteroid or comet-based technology. But all of those things also create a side effect. When you move that much atmosphere up into space, and it's about 30 miles in diameter, these columns are. So imagine 30 miles in diameter and a couple of hundred miles up. Well below that are pressure systems, high pressure, low pressure systems, and jet streams. All of that of which can be altered by the manipulation of the ionosphere in this way. And that then creates downstream weather effects that cannot be modeled, that cannot be accurately predicted. And therein lies a huge problem. When you start to manipulate by technology applications to create one effect, you might inadvertently create a number of other effects, as in the case with HAARP. The following are some of his explanations of HAARP's capabilities. Strap in tight, because this is a wild ride. HAARP has several applications and can affect a wide range of frequencies. Everything from ultra-low frequencies, all the way to the spectrum of light can be affected. It's a huge range of frequencies. HAARP operates using a small band within that range, but by manipulating that small band, they can affect this entire range of spectrum. I'll start with some of the more chill applications of HAARP. It's used for over-the-horizon radar. This can be used to detect everything from aircraft to cruise missiles and nuclear missiles. Using two transmitters, which there are two in Alaska, the smaller transmitter creates a sort of reflective mirror in the sky that can be tilted around. Then the other transmitter bounces the energy off the mirror and creates an over-the-horizon radar to see objects around the globe's horizon. Using this tech, we can pick up nuclear missiles launching before they're all the way out of the silo. Back in the day, Dr. Eastland said using radio frequency energy, you can trigger chemical reactions in the upper atmosphere, which we now know you can. It's well known. One of the things you can do by triggering these reactions is you can create ozone. So if ozone depletion is really a problem, and right now it doesn't look like it is, you can replenish ozone utilizing known laws of science. You can also use these reactions to knock out certain types of pollutants by understanding their interactions with radio frequency energy. But for some reason, none of these are being looked at, even though they offer huge potentials. Energy transfer is another application of HAARP. The first successful test of a small array was to see if you can take electrical energy, convert it to radio frequency energy, send it up to, say, a satellite or low-orbiting platform, then convert that radio frequency energy back into electrical energy that could be utilized as a power source. So, used as a power source, you could have low-orbiting platforms all over the world powered by HAARP and systems like HAARP for up to 10,000-hour missions, in effect keeping these platforms afloat indefinitely by feeding them the necessary energy they need to maintain their power levels. Wireless transfer of electrical energy. Man, what a concept. Now we're delving into the darker aspects of HAARP. HAARP can broadcast extremely low frequencies up to the ionosphere as a pulse, kind of like a punch, which causes the ionosphere to vibrate in resonance and harmony with the ground. The low frequency is bounced back off the ionosphere and back to the ground, creating what's known as Earth-penetrating tomography. It's basically like an X-ray that can look several miles deep into the Earth for underground structures, mineral deposits, nuclear facilities, tunnels, and mining facilities. However, if you use too much energy in the extremely low frequency range, you could trigger geologic events like earthquakes. In fact, on April 27, 1997, Secretary of Defense William Cohen made a statement in a DoD news briefing related to this. While commenting on weapons of mass destruction, one of them he cited was environmental weapons systems utilizing electromagnetic energy for triggering earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and climate alterations. Weather modification is what HAARP's known for, and as you can probably figure, HAARP can absolutely do that. In a nutshell, HAARP heats up clouds and/or the ionosphere, which causes weather changes. In October 2005, Dr. Eastland presented a paper at Penn State on weather modification utilizing gravitational waves. It talks about modifying the weather using 1,600 times less energy than was anticipated for weather modification applications using HAARP. Dr. Eastland was also invited by the European Space Agency to do a paper on weather modification using the HAARP systems. That was completed in 1999. After that, FEMA and NASA contracted with Dr. Eastland to do a paper about utilizing satellite-based technology for weather modification applications. One of the things Eastland saw while doing these papers is the ability to affect tornadoes. Seriously, check this out. With tornadoes, you have a warm front coming in contact with a cold front that causes a shearing force, which causes that twisting action that creates the tornado. What Eastland found was if you heat that cold front enough before it comes in contact with the warm front, you don't get that shearing action that creates the tornado, essentially knocking out tornadoes. The problem is, if you miss that cold section and heat up the warm front so that there's an even bigger difference in the temperature between the two fronts, you have more energy to make that tornado much bigger and more destructive. The intense energy being beamed into the sky by HAARP is actually heating up the atmosphere, causing weather changes. The military's own record proves it. They've admitted it within their own documents, and yet they still deny it to the public. Dr. Brooks Agnew has researched extremely low-frequency wave technology for the past 30 years and is convinced HAARP's effect on the ionosphere does alter the weather. HAARP couldn't affect the jet stream directly, but indirectly it could. Because if you push the ionosphere out into space, then the stratosphere, just under the ionosphere, has to move in to fill that gap. When it moves, it could pull the jet stream with it, thus rerouting it hundreds of miles, changing the way water moves through our atmosphere. Climate intervention operations have been in full use for 30+ years. Geoengineering, as it's referred to, is weaponized weather. They can drown you or drought you, and with advanced laser technology, they can start fires from great distances. HAARP can create an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse, to override the circuits in computers and electronics and cause computer errors, blackouts, disrupt communication, and cause aircraft and satellites to crash. In some cases, with enough EMP power, you can melt circuitry. So if you increase the power enough, you can create this massive EMP effect and knock out everything in the sky in a certain area. What are the physical effects of HAARP on human health? Radio frequency energy can be used to override your brain for mind control, along with control every organ in your body. G.F. Gordon MacDonald, a professor at UCLA and science advisor to President Johnson, wrote that if we could figure out a way to electronically stroke the ionosphere in just the right way, we could return a signal to the Earth that would manipulate the behavior of people over huge geographic areas. In 1969, we didn't have a way to electronically stroke the ionosphere and create that kind of returning signal. Now, with HAARP, we can. The human body is like a radio station tuner. It's similar to when you're going through the numbers, listening for a radio station to come in. When your radio picks up the radio station clearly, the radio station and your radio are in harmony. The same is true for the human body. You can affect everything down to a molecular level if you understand enough about the physics, the body, and the math of radio frequency's relationship to it. In other words, you can manipulate radio frequency energy to affect the body. A study sponsored by the U.S. Air Force at the University of Utah that was completed in 1985 produced the Dosimetrics Radio Frequency Handbook. It's the dosages of radio frequency necessary to override the function of every vital organ in the body, including the brain, to interfere with their natural performance. It was to be used as a weapon application. Jesus Christ. The HAARP facility in Alaska is not the only one, not by a long shot. There's more than 18 different antenna arrays operational around the world. In addition to HAARP, the United States has operated 4 other ionosphere research sites in recent years. One in Puerto Rico, near the Arecibo Observatory, a smaller one known as Hippus, near Fairbanks, Alaska, another at Area 51, and one at Montauk Island, near Long Island, New York. These facilities were built with capabilities similar to those at the HAARP facility. Interest in the ionosphere is not limited to the U.S. A 5-country consortium operates the European Incoherent Scatter Radar Site, a premier ionosphere research facility located in northern Norway. China and Russia have jointly conducted a controversial series of experiments to modify Earth's atmosphere with high-frequency radio waves. From a Russian installation called the Sura Ionospheric Heating Facility east of Moscow, scientists emitted high-frequency radio waves to manipulate the ionosphere, while the China Seismo-Electromagnetic Satellite measured the effects on plasma disturbance from orbit. The Sura base was established by the Soviet Union in the early 1980s and is said to have been the inspiration for HAARP, which was built about a decade later. There are also facilities in Apadati, Russia, near Kharkov, Ukraine, Dushanbe, Tajikistan, Japan, Brazil, the UK, and just outside of Cajamarca, Peru. All of these installations have as their primary purpose the study of the ionosphere, and most employ the capability of stimulating, to a varying degree, localized regions of the ionosphere in order to study methodically and in a detailed manner what nature produces randomly and regularly on a much larger scale. Before I started researching for this video, I had my suspicions HAARP could control the weather, but I had no idea it could do all those other goddamn things. That's pretty fucking scary. Looking back though, it doesn't really surprise me. Why would the military spend nearly $300 million and counting on something that's not advantageous? HAARP is part of the advancement of the revolution of military affairs, using energy instead of bullets for warfare. I've always been told the military doesn't want anything to do with it unless it can blow things up and or kill people. And I doubt they picked Alaska as a site just because it sounds cool. There's a lot of claims that when you manipulate barometric pressure, it'll create hot and cool areas, which is what causes different weather systems. They've been documented to have done this on a large scale at HAARP. Moreover, I find it awfully suspicious that in the beginning, HAARP was exclusively a government-sponsored program, but sometime in the 90s, coincidentally when they found and experimented with barometric pressure creating weather systems, they cut all ties and all notions that the government had anything to do with it. Even though HAARP was taken over by the University of Alaska, it still receives large amounts of grant money from the government to this day. As former CIA Director Richard Helms said, the difference between a conspiracy theory and reality is about 2 weeks. Or as American author and journalist Gore Vidal said, what is the best way to hide unpleasant truths? Call it a conspiracy theory. Now, I don't think of myself as a conspiracy theorist, more like a critical thinker. Thank you for watching and listening until the very end. You kicked total ass.